Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear friends. Allah bless you all. Okay, let's resume Al-Fatiha. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallama wa baraka ala Sayyidina wa Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Allahumma la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Allahumma zidna wa la tanqusna wa akrimna wa la tuhinna wa a'atina wa la tahrimna wa athirna wa la tu'thir alayna wa ardina wa arda 'anna ya kareem. So, Alhamdulillah, we've been looking at Surah al-Anfal, and so we last looked at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling us that, these, what would be done to them, Quraysh, if they kept opposing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is the exact same as what would be done to, these people who opposed the Prophets before. Like the habitual approach of Fir'aun and those just before him. They saw the truth, they learnt the truth, they had the opportunity to align themselves with the command of God, but they didn't. So then there were consequences. So we get a bit more insight into that, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّ اللَّهَ لم يكن مغيرا نعمة أنعمها على قوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم وأن الله سميع عليم. So we're getting two reasons now. So it says this is because Allah would never discontinue His favor to a people until they discontinue their faith. Surely Allah is all hearing and all knowing. So we're going to depart from this translation on a couple of points. So he says ذَلِكَ, and this dhalika is quite significant. It's basically saying that punishment, that difficulty, that scenario, that situation that put them, took them from their state of, being high and mighty to being destroyed and punished, is simply, is because of their own actions. So that matter that happened to them is according to the sunnahs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what His wisdom dictates. And so why did that happen to them? Why did those scenarios occur? ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّ اللَّهَ, because Allah, the supreme, absolutely perfect, majestic King, who doesn't need anyone, He doesn't need His servants, He doesn't need anything from them. Rather, they're the ones who are in need of Him, and He's showering His blessings on them in the first place. And He says, ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّ اللَّهَ لَمْ يَكُ. So this is originally لَمْ يَكُن. There's a noon missing. So it's dropped, you can drop it in Arabic, the noon. But its absence here indicates negation completely. Like there's no way whatsoever at all that Allah would change a blessing, a ni'mah, and the blessing is well-being, safety, security, and all these things that He's given to a people, an'amaha ala qawmin, people who are able to fulfill what's due because of that blessing, but maybe they choose not to. Hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. He doesn't change those blessings until they change what's in themselves. This is the rule, and there's another verse, Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma bi qawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. Similar meaning, but this verse is clearer in that regard. Allah is saying Allah gives people blessings. He's God. He's the Creator. He wants good for His servants, so He gives them blessings, and those blessings will remain with a people until they themselves change, i.e. change for the worse. So he's saying in the translation about faith, it's not about faith. It's about, it can be people who have faith, but then they go from doing good to bad, right? Or they may be, and there may be a situation where they're bad, but then become worse, which is exactly the scenario here, because Quraysh were not doing good because they were worshipping idols, and they had all the other immoral and improper practices in their society. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took them from this situation and gave them the opportunity to improve through sending them a perfect messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, through sending them a perfect book, revelation, fresh from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, showing them how to change, how to improve, how to gain the great gifts Allah gives in this life and in the next. So what did they do? So they went from a bad stage and state of worshipping idols and all the other inappropriate actions and practices. They went from that to a worse situation where they were fighting the Prophet and the Messenger of God, rejecting his message, torturing and harming the believers. They went from a bad enough state as it was to a worse one. So the blessing that they had despite their wrong, that came from God's generosity, that despite their idolatry and everything. So when they worsened in that regard and went from not just being people who did that, but people who are going to further extremes in opposing God and his messenger, they worsened. So he said this is when the punishment comes. So with Fir'aun and his people, the same, right? And with the others, the Fir'aun might have been doing bad, but when Musa alayhi salatu wasalam and his brother Harun alayhi salatu wasalam came and told him, don't do this, and all the signs from Allah came, and then they kept ignoring them and rejecting them, and when the problem came and the calamity came, oh Musa, ask Allah to remove it, and then after that they just go back to square one. All of this shows that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't just want to, even if someone's doing something wrong, right, Allah doesn't just destroy them immediately. Allah gives people chances to change and improve. Many people are just blind to this, and they don't even want to see it. They don't even think in these terms and contexts. Otherwise they'd reinterpret the events of their lives. But it's all there, it's clear for someone who can see. So he says it doesn't change it. Change the blessings that is given to someone, the good, positive, affluent, situation and the well-being that they have, or if them being affluent and their well-being, it doesn't change that unless they change. So either go from good to bad or bad to worse, or obedience to dhulm and disobedience. Then it can. So that's one thing. And then he says, Hatta right. So just the blessings continue right until they've changed. Yeah? Then it can happen. And then Allah can change the state of the blessing. وَأَنَّ اللَّهَ. So the punishment that came to these people for twofold reasons. One as a general rule, and then the other is also a rule, but this has a more practical application. They're both practical, but here he's saying, وَأَنَّ اللَّهَ سَمِيعٌ عَلِيمٌ, and because Allah hears absolutely everything, He's the all-hearing and He's the all-knowing. Allah knows what they were doing, what Quraysh were doing. Allah knows what the people of Pharaoh or Fir'aun are doing, what the people of Ad and Thamud. Allah knows exactly what they were doing. Allah knows what they were saying. Right? How can they follow this prophet, and all the insults and everything directed towards the prophets alayhim wassalatu wassalam, and the rejection of their messages, and all of these crimes and all of these sins that these people did, Allah knew every single one of them, right? So because of their actions they brought about, so the latter, what he hears, what he knows, these are the things that actually bring about the change, right? Because they've changed. So Allah protect us. So then he says, كَدَأْبِ آلِ فِرْعَوْنَ. We've seen the very similar verse just last time. وَالَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ. So that meaning will just transport here, because everything else is exactly the same. Like we said, da'ab from da'ub, amal da'ub, a continuous action or the habit, and what they did and what was done to them. The followers of Fir'aun, because they encouraged him, yes, you're this and you're that, and yes, mistreat these people and enslave them. وَالَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ. So he says, كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِ رَبِّهِمْ. Now Imam al-Biqai has got a really deep insight here, right? So he says that was the case with Pharaoh's people and those before them. They all rejected the signs of their Lord. Let's read the rest and we'll come back. فَأَهْلَكْنَاهُمْ بِذُنُوبِهِمْ So we destroyed them for their sins. وَأَغْرَقْنَا آلَ فِرْعَوْنَ And we drowned Pharaoh's people, him as well. وَكُلٌّ كَانُوا ظَالِمِينَ And each, they were all deeply entrenched in dhulm, people who are heinous wrongdoers. So he says here, كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِ رَبِّهِمْ So in the previous, before a couple of verses ago, when we have a similar construction, he says, كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِ اللَّهِ They rejected the signs of Allah. So, and now it's their Rabb, their loving Lord, who showers them with blessings and takes them from one state to a higher state and helps them. That's who they rejected and whose signs they rejected. So Imam al-Biqai says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests people. Every person on this planet has been tested. Every society, every civilization, every group has been tested. You're tested with difficulty and you're tested with ease. So the focus when he says كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِ اللَّهِ, that when they were in a situation of difficulty, that suits the fact that Allah is the supreme king and he can do what he wants to his creation, so he's testing them with that difficulty, which brings benefits. Don't think that just because something's hard, it doesn't bring anything good. Just think about pregnancy, the difficulty that a lady has, during the gestation of the baby and the development of the fetus in her womb, and then the difficulty in birth. Offset that with the happiness that she feels, not just upon giving birth, but for the years after. And if it's a good child, then for decades, right? So every difficulty brings some benefit, right? And that's just the way of the world. Nothing, few things are purely evil, right? And just like that, every good thing can also be a test. So, كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِ اللَّهِ, looking at the difficulties. And then the tests that were easy, كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِ رَبِّهِمْ, like we have in this verse. So it's actually the gifts and the blessings of their Lord that delude them. Because they think, yeah, I'm rich, I'm wealthy, I have power, we're okay, we're in charge. These people are weak, these people have no influence, so we must be alright. فأما الإنسان إذا ما ابتلاه ربه فأكرمه ونعمه فيقول ربي أكرمن. As for the human being, he says, when his Lord gives him blessings and an easy life, right? And then he tests, and in that as a test, he says, "Oh, God, my Lord has honored me." He thinks he's special. But then when he's tested with, difficulty, when his rizq is limited and restricted, or he thinks I've been humiliated by God. No, it's a test in both situations. How are you going to be? Don't start blaming God. Allah can do that, right? Because he's the one who gave the extra rizq in the first place, and he's the Lord. So this is how they are. So he says, كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِ رَبِّهِمْ They denied the signs of their loving Lord. So just because he was loving and kind and he gave them these blessings, they shouldn't have turned their backs on him. So he says, فَأَهْلَكْنَاهُمْ So we, the royal we, this is what his sovereignty dictates, right? That Allah's wisdom and the fact that he's a king, he decided this, that we destroyed them, not because of something from Allah, but because of their own sins. بِذُنُوبِهِمْ بِسَبَبِ ذُنُوبِهِمْ Because of their own sins. Dhanb is a sin that necessitates a punishment, right? It's a natural consequence of it. Horrible crimes. وَأَغْرَقْنَا آلَ فِرْعَوْنَ Which is more detail on how they were destroyed. As for the like the people of Fir'aun, why is this mentioned? Because to make the Bani Israel, they were the ones who were going around saying, these people have been duped by their religion. They think they can face Quraysh, and they were actually, some of the Jews of Medina were actually giving weapons, right? They were giving weapons to the Makkans, and after we'll see later that they actually incited them to actually go and try to harm the believers even more. So he's saying, Imam al-Biqai says, the weakness that the Bani Israel had compared to Pharaoh was less than what the believers had compared to Quraysh. And in the former situation with Pharaoh, Allah still was, Allah is capable of doing anything, and He destroyed Pharaoh and saved Bani Israel. So if He could do that, then clearly the believers have not been deluded by their deen, right? So they can be victorious with through the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And and that was it. So he says, kullun wa kullun kanu zalimin, and each of these people, each of these groups, kanu, they were rooted. It's like it became their nature, doing dhulm on themselves, dhulm on others. And one of the definitions of dhulm is treating something or putting it in other than its proper place. Or I like to expand it, saying, but treating something in an inappropriate way, in the opposite of the way it should be treated. So the rights Allah has when He sends revelation, when He sends prophets, when He demands guidance, demands that people accept His guidance, right? It's not just a request. It's not like when someone comes to your door, will you vote for this political party? It's a request. No, He's the ultimate king, right? There are implications and consequences to Him existing in our lives. Well, clearly it's the other way around. He created us, right? But us knowing that He exists, there are consequences to that, right? And they were zalimeen, so they tasted the fruit of their choice. So he says, inna sharra ad-dawabi 'inda Allahi alladhina kafaru fahum la yu'minun. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then highlights that the worst of all beings in the sight of Allah are those who persist in disbelief and never have faith, right? So the word dabba, the singular of dawab, it literally means any animal, right? That's the original meaning, any living thing, and you can apply it to a human being. But then excuse me, then the meaning was extended, or the meaning became commonly used for animals that walk, like they crawl along, like caterpillars or things like that. Or it can also include snakes, animals that are on their bellies or whatever. But generally the wording indicates something subhuman. So in a nominal sentence with sharra ad-dawabi, so connected to us before. So why were they like this, and what does those choices, those actions make them? Sharra ad-dawab, right? Because of their kufr. So he says, indeed, those who have this kufr and this disbelief, where they know the truth and then they willingly hide it and then act in a way opposite to what it necessitates and dictates, they are the worst people in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it doesn't say the worst of beings, as it's translated, the worst of animals. Right? And yes, you can say the human being is an animal, the rational animal, as the logicians say. But here the meaning is quite deliberate. The subhuman, that what makes humans human, this concept of humanity, part of it is strongly attached to knowing who their Lord is, and being grateful and obeying Him, worshipping Him, right? Recognizing the rights of the Lord. And then there's all the aspects of morality and many other things come under it. And then these people reject all of that, and so he says that the worst are those of all beings, he treats talking to them about them like the subhuman now, because what gives them their humanity, they've turned away from it. No one thinks an ungrateful person is good, anyone who's an ingrate and just acts ungratefully towards those who have done them favors, no one's going to like them. It's just human nature, right? And then what about the being who created you? What about the being who gives you all of the blessings you have? This is the point being made. So he says, الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, those who disbelieve, right? So they hide the truth. Literally, that's what it means. They cover it up and they hide it. فَهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ, and then they don't believe after that. You can tell them all you want, that Allah exists, He's done this for you, He's done this for you, they don't care. You can apprise them of all of the benefits of belief and all of the harms that will come from their disbelief, they don't care. You can tell them about every blessing that they have in their life that is from God, they do not care. So this is, this is what Allah deems them, right? And it's not me saying this, this is, this is the way reality is, right? This is what Allah's judgment on this is. And then, so he further clarifies, and there's another, so you could say the worst of these beings is someone like this, but also with the next meaning included in this. الَّذِينَ, those, so further clarification, الَّذِينَ عَاهَدْتَ مِنْهُمْ ثُمَّ يَنْقُضُونَ عَهْدَهُمْ فِي كُلِّ مَرَّةٍ وَهُمْ لَا يَتَّقُونَ. Namely, those who you, O Prophet, have entered into treaties with, but they violate them every time, not fearing the consequences. No one likes a person who's not true to his word. No one likes a person who's not honest. No one likes a person who would betray them at every opportunity, especially when it's life or death, when the stakes are high. And, in the pre-modern world, treaties, could mean the difference between life and death. And then there were, so Banu Qaynuqa, some of the Jewish people of Medina, they made treaties and alliances with the Prophet time and time and time again, and broke them time and time again. And the Prophet still, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, accepted this from them. And then there was a point where it was just too much, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that, when you make a pledge with them, when you make a treaty with them, what do? They violate it. It's not just any old violation. There were men from amongst them encouraging Quraysh to come, gather your forces and get more people to come and attack the believers. Banu Qurayza, they had this treaty, had this alliance, they would help the believers. They helped Quraysh by sending them weapons, right? What's that? Even in the modern world, if there's a nation and they have an alliance with someone, and then, there's a war between the first nation and someone else, and the allies help out the other group, they're not going to accept it. No one's going to accept it. And what makes it worse is them knowing he was a messenger of God, them having sufficient and ample evidence, the Quran, their own revelation that they had, although they tampered with it, but there was sufficient evidence. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that, those who made these treaties with you and then deliberately broke them time after time after time, that's what he thought. And then fi kulli marra, they just go and do this every single time. وَهُمْ لَا يَتَّقُونَ, and they don't fear the consequences, or you can, as Abu Sa'ud and others put it, they don't even care about the stigma of it. Being known as people who have no word. Their word is not their bond. Their word is just, it's like dust blown into the wind. It disappears. It's got no foundation, nothing to it. So this is what happens. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, and remember this situation was even it was in the pre-modern world, and it was a life or death situation, right? Literally. And then so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, in the coming verse, like, be firm with them, like make an example of them. If you ever meet them in battle, make an example of them. And if anyone was to sit down and fairly assess the situation, there would be an agreement. Someone who you've made treaties with, where your survival and their survival, together you can both thrive, but your survival can be jeopardized with them by them, but you're allies, so they should not, they should be sticking to the terms of the treaty, but worst case scenario, not opposing it and not undoing it. And then betrayals such that would leave you vulnerable when, you're being attacked by the enemy, it's not something anyone would willingly just accept. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِمَّا تَثْقَفَنَّهُمْ فِي الْحَرْبِ. So if you ever encounter them in battle, thaqaf, the root word, if you see them clearly, right? If you come across them in battle, there's a few other nuances, but that's sufficient. فَشَرِّدْ بِهِمْ مَنْ خَلْفَهُم. Make a fearsome example of them, right? So perhaps those who'd follow them may be deterred. And this is completely fair, right? Now these people who have betrayed you, left you in a vulnerable position, and so if you ever do meet them in battle, then be firm and fierce with them, right? And so make an example, so no one else would make a treaty and then leave you in a vulnerable position. If you look at the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, after he went to Medina with the Muslims, a small group, there were people all over the place wanting to come and attack and raid them, right? And to take the animals. Some people were fear of their increasing, power. There were many reasons. Some people just didn't like them. Some people didn't like the new religion. Some people, for some it was theological, and for some it was just greed, right? And so knowing that these people have been treacherous like this, and then when an example is made of them, it makes others think twice, right? And just look what happened in World War II. After they bombed Pearl Harbor, what did they do? They went and dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And what was the intention there? They wanted to bring a quick, decisive end to the war. No nation would like multiple nuclear weapons dropped on their major cities. Just the loss is catastrophic. So, it ended the war. So, an example was made of them, lest further, conflicts arise and lest other opponents think, we could get away with this. So it's a similar thing. So this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about this. لَعَلَّهُمْ يَذَّكَّرُونَ. يَذَّكَّرُونَ? So hoping. So do this, hoping that those beyond them, those others who think, we can take advantage of an opportunity like this, that maybe they'll get a strong reminder, like, whoa, it's not a game. This, we should really, hold true to our word. So that's the verse, and we'll continue from here, inshallah. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.